Doctor Who Animations Part 2, cause Part 1 was getting a bit long, so here's a Part 2 or something. I don't know, the intros to both of these are dumb. Welcome back! So, we're picking up from where we left off last time. 2013, the show's 50th anniversary. And this seems to be the point where the animations start to regain their stride, specifically with a long stream of missing episode projects. After a few years of the BBC holding off on animating any other missing episodes, they finally decide to go forward in completing another mostly surviving story, this time tackling episodes 4 and 5 of the Reign of Terror. Planets 55 took charge of this project in collaboration with Big Finish Productions. I can give this one the benefit of the doubt, considering it was the first missing episode animation in a while and only the second one ever, but yeah, it's not the best. Oh, don't get me wrong, there are positives. The character illustrations are all spot-on dead ringers. They're all very impressively detailed. Aesthetically, this gels really well with the rest of the story. Great body language, the lining and use of shading on the characters is beautiful, and the environment work is similarly gorgeous. I do genuinely feel like there's a lot to praise in this project. It's just a shame that a lot of that goes out of the window when you consider the actual character movement. Some sort of 3D motion was applied to the 2D character illustrations here, and I'm sorry, it just looks bad, especially with the choppy frame rate, and the lip syncing just isn't impressive in the slightest, nor are the facial expressions. Not to mention, the animation has a lot of awkward camera angles and cuts that are just jarring and hard to look past, and eventually it does just start to feel a little repetitive, looking at the same illustrations from the same camera angles doing the same lackluster motion over and over again with minimal improvement. Granted, I can't entirely blame the animation for that. After all, The Reign of Terror is a very talkative story with, whole scenes dedicated to characters just discussing things. So I sympathise that the animators could only do so much, but I don't know, they need to up their game. Thumbs up for the aesthetic, thumbs down for the actual character movement. The next missing story that the animations decide to tackle was the Ice Warriors, with episodes 2 and 3 being supplemented by the talents of one-hit wonder, Curio's Entertainment. Their production went for a smoother, more simplified look, less of a focus on hyper-realistic nuance and shading, and more of a focus on cleaner motion. The more cartoony likenesses are still pretty spot on here, although why the second Doctor always looks unamused and why Victoria always pulls the same facial expression, I have no idea. But the Ice Warriors themselves are represented fairly well. And I love that the artists went to the effort to depict the different costuming present in the live-action episodes as well. The motion is certainly very fluid and a significant improvement, but it does come at the cost of believable body language at some points, and the characters with asymmetrical features or clothing are just lazily flipped depending on where they're facing, rather than having unique art for these separate occasions. Still, the lip syncing is a definite step up. It fits the dialogue quite well and is very concise, and the little things like the Doctor's hair waving with motion are a nice touch. The backgrounds aren't much to write home about though, they're mostly just blurred out when the focus is on the characters, but that's not a big deal. This animation does have some drawbacks, but overall I think I'd give it a pass. It's serviceable enough, but it doesn't really blow my socks off. But we are getting there. It seemed quite apt that the next missing episode to be animated, as well as the last animated project to be undertaken in 2013, would be for arguably the most sought-after lost installment, Episode 4 of The 10th Planet. Planets 55 returned to Helmet, and I dare say they worked on their flaws quite satisfactorily, with the outcome turning out to be a happy medium between the styles of the previous two animations. Relatively well detailed, with something of a mild anime influence in the aesthetic and style, but also decently smooth frame-by-frame animation that doesn't feel jarring in the slightest, and also complements the surviving episodes well. Planet 55 continued to hone their craft when they were recommissioned for episodes 1 and 3 of the Moonbase. Stylistically, not much had changed, but they definitely had more opportunities to flex their creative muscles here, with the wider cast and a more active Doctor at the helm, allowing for many instances where they represent the lost visuals quite breathtakingly. Some parts of this animation look gorgeous, and actually help to enhance the story's icy mystique, to the point where I would almost be satisfied with never seeing the original footage again. Planet 55 were really onto something here, and I really would have liked to have seen more animations under their creative influence. And yet, after another abrupt hiatus, the style shifted again. 2 years after the missing episode animation well had seemingly dried up prematurely, rumours of a full animation of the entirely missing Second Doctor debut story The Power of the Daleks began circulating, kicked into high gear by leaked clips before the BBC inevitably officially confirmed it, with its release coinciding with the 50th anniversary of the story's original broadcast in 2016. With a story as significant as Power of the Daleks, I dare say you'd really need to try your damned hardest to do this story justice. And yet, the initial animation was a bit of a mixed bag. The titular Daleks themselves appear to be 3D cel-shaded models, which was definitely the correct approach to take for them. They look great and are animated pretty faithfully despite the fluctuating frame rate. The problem comes more with, well, said fluctuating frame rate, as well as the humanoid character animation. Now, I bear no umbrage with the likenesses, I think they're all fantastic, but the character movement itself can be very awkward at points. That's the trouble with trying to sync up modern animation to live-action audio recorded 50 years earlier. You're never going to get it spot on, and while with other projects it's easier to brush aside, here it can be especially egregious and distracting when they try filling up seconds of dead air with, idle animations. There's also a few awkward glitches at some points, not to mention the infamous goof-up with Polly and Ben's changing outfits in part 1. At least the lip-syncing is pretty great. And they capture a lot of Troughton's mannerisms and expressions pretty well if I do say so myself. Oh, and there's also a colour version that was apparently horrendous. I wouldn't know, I've never watched it. 4 years later in 2020, the project saw an updated re-release where errors and flawed aspects of the original version were ironed over and improved on, with some scenes being outright remade from scratch in the process. This wasn't a stylistic overhaul per se, mostly just a fine-tuning of the initial version. And oh my goodness, yes, now we're talking. It's still not the perfect representation, but it's certainly so much smoother and more immersive, undoubtedly the better version. The original version I'd give a cautious benefit of the doubt to, but there is absolutely no reason to seek that one out in the face of this vast, splendid improvement. Thumbs up for this. So in 2017, the BBC decided to make their 812th adaptation of Shada, this time getting Tom Baker involved with the project. And they strive to complete the experience, combining the live-action footage that was actually filmed in 1980 with animated segments supplementing the material that was never recorded. And the animation is technically very solid. The likenesses are good, the movement is smooth, the lip syncing is fine. There's 3D cel-shaded elements that are implemented pretty effectively where the Krags, Skagra's Ball and K9 are concerned, and there's some gorgeous particle effects too. I don't have a bone to pick with the animation itself. However, I find it incredibly jarring in contrast to the live-action footage, and that's always going to be a problem with Shada as a whole. No matter what supplementary material they come up with to fill in the blanks, it's just never going to feel quite right to me, and it's just going to be distracting whenever they switch back and forth between the disparate styles. I know that may sound strange coming from me, considering I've previously praised missing episode animations which often switch from the live-action surviving episodes to the cartoon missing installments, but I just find that it feels more natural and flowing when it concerns full episodes separating by ending credits and such, as opposed to this instance with chronological scenes smash-cutting their way into different mediums. But that's neither here nor there, because as I said, the animation itself is really well done. I wouldn't object to some Tom Baker audios animated in this style, honestly. But anyway, moving on. Oh, yeah, this is a thing. Released for Christmas 2018, the official YouTube channel granted us this cute and fluffy little short where the 13th Doctor helps Santa out. There's no real character animation to speak of, the movements stem from the character portraits being dragged around the screen. The artwork itself is nice though, it's quite sketchy and comic book-esque, and the likeness to Jodie is spot on. A handful of adequately used effects like snow and blurring too. But otherwise this short isn't the most noteworthy technique-wise. But it's not trying to be though, so it's whatever really. Here's another project that kind of borders the line between video game and animation, but 3D model that moves about, it counts. Now, this one takes a cartoony exaggerated approach in the visual style, and I think it looks pretty nice here. The 13th Doctor kind of looks like she could be in a 3D Disney movie, and it's quite a charming look. Her movements also feel very fluid and natural, and this is all around just very pleasant to watch. There's a fair few interesting visual effects here too, particularly with the TARDIS flying through space and with the ball of energy, and the lighting is subtle yet effective. There's not an awful lot to say here since it's only set in one room and lasts about 10 minutes, but still what's presented here is rather good. And now, for the big one. In 2019, Sun and Moon Studios and Rob Ritchie collaborated on an animation for the entirely missing 4-part Troughton story, The Macra Terror. And it's not quite as hyper-detailed as the previous missing story projects, taking a more simplified, almost cartoonish aesthetic. Ben and Polly in particular don't really look much like their live-action counterparts. However, that's more than made up for with pretty much everything else. The lighting and shading, atmospheric and absolutely perfect. The 3D cell shading and animation of the Macra, genuinely stunning and utterly blows the original out of the water. The character animation, the goddamn character animation, fluid yet believable and utterly gorgeous. This visual style flows so well and is extremely immersive, especially the facial animation. It's all in the little details, the hair jiggle physics, the eyebrow movements, and of course the top-notch lip syncing. It's all sublime. Hell, even I is a grayscale loyalist, and I do still watch the story this way pretty much all the time, am forced to admit that even the colour version looks absolutely spectacular. And to top it all off, luscious backgrounds and environments, and gorgeous particle effects. Utterly magnificent and easily the definitive missing episode animation if you ask me. Pretty much everyone else ever and their mother have complimented this thing to the ends of the earth, and I don't know how I could do it any better. It just is. Please do more Sun and Moon animations. Oh, and they also did a brief cut-down animation for the Wheel in Space that was fairly okay too, I guess. So despite 2 episodes of this story actually surviving in the BBC archives, this animated project strived to recreate the whole experience in an animated medium, considering BBC America is funding these things, and I guess they want to broadcast the whole thing in a consistent format, which makes sense for new time viewers. As such, on the DVD you can either view the adventure as a fully colour widescreen animation, or as an authentic 4:3 black and white experience with the surviving episodes. The latter is personally what I go for as a 60s purist. In comparison to the prior animation, it's a similar aesthetic but not quite as advanced or experimental. It's still really good though. They represent the tale pretty effectively, taking a few artistic liberties here and there, particularly with the appearance of the chameleons. Decent flow, fine likenesses, and some cool 3D animated sequences where the planes or spaceships are concerned. It's a good one, but not quite the peak that its predecessor was. So after focusing so much attention on the missing stories of Season 4 for the longest time, the BBC decided to deliver some TLC to Season 5 again, this time animating the fan favourite story, Fury from the Deep. And who's doing this animation? Big Finish Creative, who are apparently a rebranded Planet 55. Huh. Well, surely this is good news, right? They did great work before. Can they recreate that magic 6 years later? Well, okay, I don't think this looks terrible by any means, but in the face of the previous couple of missing episode projects, this is a bit of a step backwards, I'm forced to admit. The character likenesses are all still recognisable. I sure can tell that's Troughton, obviously, but the visual style is much more simplified and weirdly exaggerated. Not only does the Doctor have a huge chin, but really long slender man-like arms. Like, what's that about? Also, oh my goodness, what on earth happened to the lip syncing? It's easily the biggest drawback of this animation. The lip syncing is totally, unforgivably inaccurate. Also, a bit of a personal complaint of mine, but I always enjoyed the claustrophobia of 60s Who. How a lot of the sets are small and confined, and those spatial limitations help to emphasize the tension and the character's fight or flight responses. But meanwhile, this animation takes the creative liberty to have the rooms be as huge and roomy as possible, and that kind of works against the atmosphere for me. Still, watching it in black and white helps to regain some of that atmosphere, and that's naturally how I always choose to watch it. This project also has a touch of the awkward idle animations to fill dead air problem that I mentioned earlier, so it's not quite the perfect representation of Fury from the Deep that I yearn for. Again, don't get me wrong, it's still fine enough, but I just expected better, in comparison to what came before. Under the circumstances of lockdown, and to tie into the already long-forgotten Time Lord Victoria saga, the official YouTube channel showcased a 5-part animated series based on the titular enemies of the Doctor, entitled Daleks! And to start off with some positives, the modelling is fairly good. The Daleks, mechanoids, and all the other robotic characters look quite snazzy and proportionally correct, and while the texturing could be better, they are a bit smooth and shiny for my tastes, they're overall still rather eye-catching and pretty. Similar case for the environments. The Dalek city on Skaro especially is decently recreated based on its appearance in Series 9. The actual movement of the character models, though, is a huge mixed bag. In some scenes it looks fine, but in other scenes it looks very robotic, which I know should sound like a compliment for CG art films revolving around mechanical creatures, but this is the bad, cheap-looking kind of robotic animation, and whenever large fleets of Daleks are moving as one, it just looks awkward. And to top it off, any moment involving particle effects on screen is just the worst. Any explosions, any laser effects, dear god, these are some of the blockiest looking smoke trails I've ever seen. I do think there's potential here for sure, but there's also room for improvement. If this team comes back, they better get their act together. Now, whether or not I could accurately grade this one is up for debate, considering it's not out at the time of filming or posting this video, so, I don't know, I could limit this to just the DVD trailer? There we go, a review of the DVD trailer of The Web of Fear. Plus, I think we can reasonably assume that this will be indicative of the final product anyway, and if it's not, then oopsie daisy. Either way, this animation... I don't know about this one, guys. So here they're taking a cel-shaded approach, where they showcase a 3D model through textures and render settings which give it a 2D art style. Ordinarily, this is a great technique, and it can provide some sublime results in the right context, but it's extremely difficult to pull it off convincingly on humanoid or animalistic models. Not impossible, of course, but the character animation really has to sell it, and here... oh, they mocapped the animation. Again, also not a bad technique on its own merits, but combining realistic human actor animation with a cel-shaded art aesthetic sure is jarring if you ask me. Also, the model just looks wrong. Oh, don't get me wrong, facially it resembles Troughton quite well, but the rest of the body just looks pretty sloppily done. The arms in particular appear very disproportionate, and considering how they're being flapped about with relatively little finger movement, they just look awkward and not right. The lip syncing looks really simplistic too, and that haters gonna hate run at the end is just... I mean, wow. I can't comment much on the environment work from this trailer alone, but it does kind of bug me how bright the underground setting is in comparison to the live-action episodes. They haven't really captured the atmosphere that well, if you ask me. Still, slapping in a bit of the old grayscale does mildly help to alleviate this issue. I kinda just wish someone would cough up the actual episode 3 already so we didn't have to put up with this, though. So in conclusion... I don't know, I got Jean-Luc to write something for me. Animation is pretty poggers, I hope they do more in future. What he said.
Will, you can't leave it there. This isn't finished. Now tell me, when are you gonna... Will, what about LEGO Dimensions? I had LEGO Reconstruction of William Hartnell's Regeneration in it. Oh, and Sprout Boy, and Ice Cream, and the Lockdown Shorts, and that cancelled underwater men's animation.
They're not canon!